All right. Well, welcome everyone to Yoga for Health and Resilience. This 10-week series of 90-minute classes is offered through YogaX, a special initiative in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences and the School of Medicine at Stanford University. This evidence-based protocol is designed by Dr. Christiane Brems, faculty and program director at YogaX. My name is Gino, and I am the program manager at YogaX, and it is my pleasure and honor to guide you through this practice. So today, you may want to have a couple of blocks, maybe a blanket, a bolster might feel nice as well. It would be nice to have a strap for the later part of the practice. And some wall space can be nice as well. So taking a moment to gather your resources and just having them maybe within arm's reach. And then considering your seat for our opening practice. Could be a chair, could be a yoga block or two. Maybe it's a ball, or maybe there is a setup like we have explored in some of our previous sessions with bolsters and blocks. But take a moment to make a very intentional choice about how you're assembling your seat this morning. And we'll start with an opening centering. Ground us into this present moment, grounding us into this place, wherever you are, and grounding us into this community. Once you've found your seat, allow yourself to settle in, knowing you can always change your seat whenever you'd like, just doing so very mindfully. Take a moment to consider an intentional position for your hands. Perhaps palms facing down on the thighs, grounding, or maybe the palms facing upward, perhaps symbolizing an openness. Take a moment to consider what you would like to do with your eyes. Maybe it's just a matter of lowering the gaze and still taking in the environment, perhaps lowering the eyelids to half mast, or if you feel comfortable doing so, perhaps closing your eyes to turn inward, making the choice that's most auspicious for you in this moment. I invite you to really welcome a sense of grounding into this present moment. Perhaps finding a sense of expansion, maybe even a sense of stability at your core.
Are you gonna do the class?
The stability at the very center of your being. And just allow yourself to arrive in this present moment. Bringing all of your experiences with you. Any of these experiences from the body, the breath, the mind, thoughts, emotions, your wisdom and intuition, and even your context. your relationship, your community dynamic. Welcoming all of it into this moment. And as you sense into the reverberations of the week, just take a moment to notice what's present in the body, perhaps a sense of tension or strength. Perhaps a sense of restlessness or maybe energy. Maybe fatigue. Maybe even a sense of collapse. Maybe that shows up with some kind of resonance in the breath. Perhaps some echoes in the mind. Maybe stories or ruminations from the week. Just simply noticing with an open heart. Just simply noticing with an open mind. Just simply noticing what's present in this moment. Without getting wrapped up in anything, without needing to chase it away. Just simply being with whatever is there, however challenging it may be, however uncomfortable it may be, pleasant or unpleasant. And as you sit with this, you may notice a gentle sense of ease in the sensations. Perhaps ease in the body or a gentle settling of the story in the mind or a calm quality in the breath. Or not, that's fine too. Simply just being open to noticing if there is a shift that's occurring by cultivating this presence, noticing what might be a projection versus what might be a more clear experience. And just staying connected to all your layers and continuing to invite a curiosity about the experience as it unfolds in this present moment. And from that sense of presence, I invite you to consider an intention for our practice today. Perhaps something that's already revealed itself, something that has been there and is revealing itself, maybe something that is something, maybe just holding space for something that can potentially arise. Maybe it's very subtle. Maybe a very intangible quality. Whatever that is, I invite you to perhaps bring your hands to your heart if that feels inviting to you, perhaps even bowing your head if that feels inviting. As you consider this intention or this space for intention, with an inhale, I invite you to breathe that into your heart. And with an exhale, sending it out. And I invite you to lower your hands if they were lifted and Open your eyes and lift your gaze if it was lowered, and welcome everyone to session 6 of Yoga for Health and Resilience. So this series is an expression of integrated holistic yoga designed to take us through all aspects of our integration and holism as individuals and collectively. And session 6 is dedicated to the 5th limb of yoga, Pratyāhāra. Pratyāhāra is interpreted as the guarding of the senses, or the turning inward. This limb is the beginning of a transition in this 8-limb journey of yoga, from the outer practices, which we've explored in our previous sessions, our ethical foundations, the yamas and niyamas, developing skills for purposeful living. There is the outer practices of asana and our breath practices. And now, as we start to work towards inner practices, we begin to cultivate a attentiveness. We begin to cultivate perhaps a sense of focus, maybe even a sense of concentration, as we begin to move towards meditation, as we begin to open ourselves to the experience of union, joy, bliss, integration. And it's very important practice, this 4th limb symbolizing the significance of the turning inward, right? Being able to distinguish outer and inner is in and of itself this great gift, I think, to perhaps elicit a little bit of gratitude, to be aware of this capacity to turn inward. But we begin to observe how both external and internal sensations affect our reactivity, and also perhaps our capacity to not be reactive, our capacity to sustain some peacefulness and some calm in our mind stories. So today we'll focus on the stories of the mind, and we'll notice what we bring to the mat, and we'll notice perhaps what we carry off the mat with us. Today, this exploration will empower us to still the fluctuations of the mind. And that is in reference to the 2nd sutra of Patanjali, Yoga Chitti Vritti Nirodha. So the interpretation of that is yoga is the stilling or the calming or the providing peace, the cultivating peacefulness around these fluctuations of the stuff or the stories of the mind. These narratives, these tales that the mind tends to spin, these are the fluctuations of the mind. And they're often referred to as vṛttis in the sutra that I just mentioned, and in a lot of the other texts as well. So today we'll explore them and use that framework to explore how we turn inward and start our journey into the inner practices. So as we explore the vṛttis, there are 5 of them, and there's a pairing of a few of them that can be helpful as we consider understanding them. And one of the first pairings that I'll offer you is there is the 2 vṛttis, perception and misperception. And we're constantly processing all of the stuff of the mind, right? All of this stuff that comes in through the senses. And when it's processed in a way that aligns with reality, then we tend to call that clear perception. And when we process that stuff, those stories, in any way that has perhaps a bias attached to it, then, and perhaps that bias is fueled by our kleshas, which we explored last week, right? So our attachment, our aversion, our ego, our fears, or our confusions, then that may result in misperception. We all experience both of these. Both sides of this coin sometimes is how this is referred to. And we perceive clearly at some times, and we also misperceive at times. And as I say, it's kind of two sides of a coin. It's still not a binary concept. It's not we don't want to fall into a dichotomy. I'm either clear and true, or I'm misperceiving and false, right? There's actually a lot more nuance to it. And I just want to share with you something that a quote from Harold Pinter, who's a Nobel Prize winning playwright. And he writes about truth in a way that I think is helpful for this context. He says, "The real truth is that there never is any such thing as one truth. There are many. These truths challenge each other, recoil from each other, reflect each other, ignore each other, and tease each other and are blind to each other." And I just think that that's a really helpful way to embrace that nuance of story. Stories are really powerful things. They're really dynamic. And I've heard them describe stories are like ideas wrapped in emotions, right? So it takes a lot of processing, and it takes a lot of cultivation of presence in order to cultivate or facilitate the circumstances so that we can process in a way that's meaningful, in a way that provides clarity. So this is, I think, an invitation to stay curious, to explore and listen with humility, and to cultivate a relationship with this dance between clear perception and misperception. So can we stay open to exploring without getting wrapped up in the story? So those are two of the Vṛttis, and they have this interesting dynamic relationship, and as do all of the Vṛttis. There's another kind of pairing here for the next two that I'll describe, and the first one is memory. And memory can serve us very well, right? It can help us recall very useful experiences, but memory can also lead us astray. We can recall misperceptions, right? We can get trapped in the past with attachment or aversion from revisiting something with a clear perception. We often reconstruct memory, and it's often reconstructed with the bias that we're still either carrying from that moment to now, depending on the context. Perhaps reconstructing a memory that serves our ego best. And we rely on memory all the time, but we also notice when memory might get in the way of us actually having a novel experience, a present moment experience, instead of maybe indulging in nostalgia, thinking about how things were better, thinking about how we used to perform or experience things. We're often stuck in a time traveling experience with memory at times. And time traveling works both ways, which kind of brings us to the next Vṛtti that I'll discuss, and that's fantasy and imagination. And again, there are some really great things about fantasy and imagination that allow us to be creative, that allow us to envision possibilities, but it can also lead us to being detached from that present moment, the same way we kind of explored with memory. We fantasize and we daydream instead of coming to a present moment experiencing a present moment experience and being willing to explore what's unfolding. We can get trapped in the future as well, and in an effort to avoid perhaps certain things that we don't consider aligned with our interests, and that can sometimes, that fear of something that maybe has not existed yet and may never exist, can often contribute to a sense of anxiety, because we want to control that thing in the future that we were projecting into that future. So that's kind of the two sides of time travel with those two Vṛttis that I think is a helpful context to explore them. And we'll do this on our mat. And we'll look at that experience of coming into a shape or maybe a breath practice and having a memory of the practice or a memory of the shape and letting that kind of override what we could be experiencing in the moment that may provide some empowerment on how to experience something in a way that allows us to evolve our practice. And then sometimes we hold an ideal of that shape, right? We have this, down dog should look like this, or whatever that shape is. We project that into an expectation and a prediction. So that's the two other Vṛttis that we'll explore. And the fifth one is sleep, essentially, nidra, but not necessarily yoga nidra, as you might have had it experienced in some of the constructive rest practices. This, in the sense of the Vṛttis, is a deep sleep. It's kind of the absence of the other Vṛttis. It's the absence of the other fluctuations. And we won't be playing with that today on our mat. You can take a nap later on. You can sleep. I hope you have good opportunity to have that deep sleep experience later on, because I think that that's actually the interesting relationship here, right? Because there's a lot of things that we can do with some of these other four Vṛttis that set us up so that we can perhaps experience that deep sleep that we've come to find is, so important in modern science, as we've been able to take a lot of these tests, and the evidence has shown some of the things that go on in that state of deep sleep that provide restoration and recovery, and all of these great mechanisms that play out, like the lymphatic system flushing the brain and preparing us to meet the new day. So we have this experience sometimes of just sleeping on something and waking up with maybe a little more clarity, a little more clear perception of it. And perhaps it's that deep sleep, that this absence, this counter to the other fluctuations of the mind, that helps facilitate that. So there's a reciprocity there. Can you set up an opportunity for you to experience the deep sleep? And can you benefit from the deep sleep that helps provide clarity for when you wake and walk through life and experience these fluctuations, perhaps with a more clear perception? So those are the Vṛttis, and we'll play with them in our practice today. And we'll start by playing with them in our breathing practice. So once again, I'll invite you to find a seat for your breathing practice. And you may like to, once again, perhaps you already have that set up, or you'd like to take that shape with the bolster in a halfway reclined, 2 blocks, and then maybe even a wall or blankets that can help support that. I won't go into too much detail since we've kind of gone over that in our previous sessions, but just take a moment to choose your seat for the breathing practice. Maybe it's a matter of not reclining and finding a seat on a chair or a block and allowing for the natural curves of the spine. So allowing your spine to come away from a back rest and intentionally coming into a seated posture that allows you to ground down and expand up. Take a moment and just notice what will serve you best in this present moment. And as you begin to set up, checking in with many of the familiar qualities that we invite: grounding down, stabilizing, inviting a sense of expansion. Perhaps considering something intentional for the placement of the hands, the eyes. Just notice if any of these decisions just came out of habit. It's the way we always do it, just coming from memory. Perhaps you just always place the hands down. Maybe noticing if there's something novel, if there's something new about changing the hand position. It could be something symbolic and turning the palms upward to invite a sense of openness. It could even be something that you feel in the body, opening through the collarbone, opening through the heart center. Whatever choice you make, of course, you can always make adjustments as the experience unfolds. And just making those adjustments very mindfully. And as you notice attending to this experience of the present moment, perhaps even just a little sense of gratitude for that gift of presence and that experience and that current unfolding, nuance-filled sensory perception that helps to bring awareness to the physical senses, that helps to bring more awareness to the breath and helps to anchor the mind. Perhaps reveals a little bit more of the intuitive wisdom it's always there to guide this experience. I invite you to become very curious about cultivating clear perception, tending to the current needs as they unfold, not necessarily what's being remembered or predicted. But just tuning in to the present moment experience in all the layers. And as you turn that focus inward, noticing these experiences, begin to attune to the present moment experience of the breath. And again, not a nostalgic breath, not an aspirational breath, but a breath that's rooted in a clear perception. Perhaps noticing qualities of this breath that relate to your unique experience with the breath. Some of these qualities that we've suggested in the past include maybe the way the breath is moving, the journey of the breath, the location. Maybe it's the temperature, the texture, the sound. Is there a combination of these qualities that are more indicative of your unique experience with the breath that help to cultivate that curiosity about how the breath is unfolding? Just noticing when the breath reveals that clear experience. Perhaps a little something new, perhaps a little something novel. Maybe a little sense of gratitude for that revelation as it unfolds. And I invite you to become curious about all 4 parts of the breath cycle. Becoming really curious about how the inhalation is unfolding and noticing if you perceive a pause at the top of the inhale, where the inhale ends and before the exhale begins. Becoming really curious about how the exhale is unfolding. Noticing if you perceive a pause at the bottom of the breath. Once the exhale is released, and before the inhale brings in air. And continue to cultivate a curiosity about how this cycle unfolds without needing to correct it or judge it, bring symmetry to it, allowing it to be uniquely its own. Inhaling, pausing, exhaling, pausing. And just noticing with an open heart and trusting your deep, intuitive, wise self to clear the lens of perception, free from bias, not what you remember the breath to be or what you predict or want the breath to be, but just meeting the breath in this cycle as if for the first time. Inhale, pause, exhale, and pause. After you complete the next breath cycle, take a moment to plan a transition if you have supported yourself on a bolster, and just take a moment to very intentionally take care to transition into a seated position, perhaps. If you're already in the seated position, just taking a moment there to notice if anything has revealed itself, if anything has arisen that you would like to acknowledge and take with you into the next phase of our practice today. As we transition into our next phase of practice, I'll invite you to come to a standing position as you're ready. So taking a moment to clear away any props that were on your mat, but still keeping blocks close by. Perhaps clearing your bolster and blanket out of the way if they were set up. And once you've come to the mat, just take a moment to consider a position for your mat. I think I'll take a little bit different position than I think I have in the past, and come to I'm going to come to the top of the mat in this little novel angle. I have a couple different options to choose from as we find a footprint and find a Tadasana shape. And take a moment to meet Tadasana, meet your mountain pose as if for the first time. So taking a moment to consider the footprint. We've talked about this a number of times in our sessions. So just taking a moment to notice if you come in here and just programmed out of habit, place things without necessarily checking in, just taking a moment to check in, see what's there. Notice if you are projecting how a mountain pose should be or an ideal of the shape. Just take a moment to come into the present moment as you begin to ground. Maybe there's a moment to raise the toes up, lifting the toes and spreading the toes. And as you lift the toes and spread the toes, perhaps there's this engagement in the low leg, all the way through the phalanges, the feet, the metatarsals. You can feel the arches come alive. When it's right for you, perhaps starting to ground down through the toes, maybe noticing how you perceive the footprint. Sometimes the footprint can be perceived as a triangle, right? Structurally, in the skeletal shape of the foot, there is one point at the back and an angle of phalanges and toes that kind of widen as they face forward. But energetically, you may view the back as being very perhaps rectangular and having four corners, an inner and an outer, an inner back, an outer back, an inner front, an outer front. Take a moment to just check in with grounding and notice that both of those truths can coexist, that both of those truths reflect each other. They perhaps challenge each other. And as you begin to ground down, maybe even having that slight engagement by lifting the knees, if that feels like that helps to provide support in your Tadasana mountain pose. Perhaps noticing the very tip of the center of the crown of the head and inviting a little bit of expansion upward, maybe even feeling that axial extension, a little bit of a decrease in the curves of the spine as you stand tall, grounding down to reach up through the very crown of the head. And we'll just take a few shoulder shrugs, allowing for the scapula to kind of lead the way before arm movements and allow that to be, again, uniquely your own. Notice if you always go in one direction, and that's fine. Maybe that's really informing a way to guard and take care of the shoulders, but also notice if both of those directional movements may be able to provide a variety of experience that gives us a little bit more clear perception of how the humerus meets the scapula, the glenohumeral joint. And then perhaps looking for that middle place after exploring up and down and back and forward. And from that more clear perception of a middle, I'll invite you to perhaps take an inhale as you lift up through the arms. Maybe noticing your pause. And then gently allowing the arms to fall down on the exhale. And perhaps once again, noticing that pause. And letting this cycle be, once again, uniquely your own. No need to follow me or anything else you're seeing on the screen. Perhaps your pause is longer or shorter than mine. Perhaps you're moving faster or slower. Allow that experience to be whatever the dance between the body and the breath for you at this present moment is as it unfolds. And take maybe one or two more of these up and down movements, letting that cycle be informed by your unique experience. And the next time the arms come down, we'll inhale to rise back up. And then once you make your way up, perhaps clasping at the wrist or the thumbs, whatever feels good to you. And then inviting a bit of a side bend here. Maybe noticing if you'd like to adjust your stance. Perhaps that's something that becomes a habit as well. Maybe there's always a tighter footprint to create an ideal shape, or maybe there's always a tendency to widen. Just notice what serves you well in this side bending shape, coming back through the center and over to the other side in your own time, in your own pace. So perhaps stillness here may feel most empowering to you as you stay in a side bend and let it unfold, or perhaps moving with breath. And maybe also moving with breath and noticing the pause between breath in all four of the breath cycle, of the parts of the breath cycle. Just noticing if we're remembering this or projecting this ideal shape. Allowing any change to occur in that clasp. And when you're ready, completing the cycle of breath and the symmetrical move that allows you to balance that side bending before coming back to our Tadasana shape with the arms down and just taking a moment, perhaps noticing any shift that's occurred after the side bending. And we'll come into a standing version of a cat-cow. And what I'll invite this time is a protraction, kind of reaching forward with the arms, but you can definitely keep your elbows bent in this. So there's an extension forward of the upper arm, and then an opening of the heart and a reach back with the shoulder blades coming towards each other and allowing for that to unfold in any way that makes sense. So maybe there's a little hinge in the knees that helps with that. Inhale to open, perhaps. Exhale to close, and allow for that breath cycle, once again, to be uniquely your own, involving all four parts of the breath. So no need to over arch. Noticing if there's an ideal of what an open heart should be, feel, or look like. And there might be a little bit of that play with the scapula that's present here. So I'll invite you to, the next time your arms come forward, and I'll just get a little bit closer, I think, for this. The next time your arms come forward, I'll invite you to wrap the right arm underneath the left and perhaps allow for that protraction, and this is an internal rotation as well. And you can stay here, or you can invite a little bit more internal rotation, or I'm sorry, this is internal rotation. So this is external rotation here, right? So we've got this kind of cross of the elbows, cross of the forearms. And just notice if there's an invitation for them to continue their journey in this external rotation and play with that idea of protracting and retracting and internal and external rotation. And just allow for that experience to be something in between without forcing or clinging or projecting that into the wrap. And then let that be enough when you're ready, and just take a few more of those cat-cow, open, close, inhale, exhale, checking in with your pause before playing with that other side. And we'll wrap, when you're ready, the arms in front and the elbow underneath, and just allow for the internal rotation and protraction, and then a little bit of external rotation, and maybe that's enough. Maybe there's a little bit of playing with the retraction and the external rotation, maybe allowing for the breath to allow the experience to unfold. Maybe noticing any subtle changes that occur in the scapula as you take the moment to check in with the breath. Notice if there's any mind story going on. If you can stay curious about the current experience as it unfolds. And once you've played with that to your satisfaction, just come back to a little bit of that cat-cow movement, allowing yourself to come back to a neutral space in the middle of the opening and closing before allowing your arms to rest at the side again. And come back to that tabletop shape from that tabletop position. I'm sorry, not tabletop, from Tadasana. We'll get there. From that Tadasana shape. Once again, notice the place where the humerus comes into the scapula. So looking for that middle spot, perhaps closing your eyes. Noticing if there's been any shift in how your stance has evolved throughout our warm-up and standing shape. And taking a moment to make sure that we have blocks wherever you are. Maybe you're still at that front of the mat, and if you're not, then just taking a moment to make sure that you have blocks nearby. And from that standing shape in Tadasana, we'll play with a forward fold. So the forward folds that we've gone through in the past have been an invitation to maybe move the top part of the femur back while the tailbone maybe even feels like it lifts up. I invite you to consider this sensation of the pelvis rolling over the top of the femur, and then maybe allowing the hands to come down to a block or a chair or whatever prop makes sense for you. So take a moment to just consider that mechanism, the roll forward, the roll over the top of the femur, and the lean back at the top of the head of the femur. And then come back to the 4-part breath in this half hinge, this half fold. And just notice if we're falling right back into maybe the way that we remembered that, or if we can really experience this hinge this morning or today, whatever time it is where you are. Noticing if you have a different sense in the physical body, the sensation in the hamstrings. Maybe there's an opportunity to find a little bit more length through the spine in this horizontal line. So we have these 2 directional lines that we can play with here. And just looking for clear perception. And they don't have to be perfectly horizontal or perfectly vertical at all. It's the spirit of that reach in the half lift. And from this shape, I'll invite you to play with exactly where you would like to orient your fold, and then perhaps invite a little bit of rotation in this shape. So notice that my knees became dynamic and kind of moved with this rotation. My right knee bent, my left hip went back, my right hip's a little bit forward here. And I'll inhale, perhaps pausing before exhaling and playing with the other side. So there are different parts of this story, different sides of the story. You can come to the floor. You may be lifting up into a chair, but taking that moment to go from side to side at your pace with your breath cycle. Whatever side you're on, just take a moment to finish and feel balanced so that you've been able to explore this equally on both sides, or at least it feels that way. And as you're ready, ground through the feet, feel the strength rooting down and a little bit of strength in the core as you begin to inhale to rise back up, perhaps inhaling the arms all the way up and then exhaling the hands back down. So we'll continue this hinging shape for a couple different shapes moving forward. So just allow that shape to continue to unfold, being really curious about having a clear perception about how that hinge unfolds as the practice continues. So grounding through the footprint, feeling the stability of the lower legs. Inhale to rise up, maybe finding expansion. And as you exhale, notice that roll of the pelvis over the femur. And when you're ready, perhaps planting the hands on blocks or the floor, take a step back and lower down to one knee, followed by the other knee. Notice if there's a habit to always step back with one knee versus the other knee. And as you begin to settle into a tabletop shape, just take a few moments to make any movements that help feel authentic and clear in tabletop that aren't necessarily, again, habits or memories or projections of what tabletop should be. But take a moment to take a intentional tabletop shape where your hands are directly beneath the shoulders and the knees are directly beneath the hips. And then slightly move the hands forward a little bit, maybe about half of a handprint. And when you're ready, lean forward a little bit, tuck the toes, and hover the knees. Invite the hips up and back as you push the floor away. And welcome your first down dog of the morning. And from that down dog shape, you can start to consider if you're habitually already moving into maybe stretching the calves and bending the knees. If down dog does not feel like an inviting pose for you today, you can always take a puppy dog pose. You can also perhaps stay in that tabletop shape and maybe invite something that is novel in this experience or something that is very true in clear perception. But from that down dog shape, take a moment to once again notice this hinge at the hip. Notice how the pelvis rolls over the femur, and notice if you can press into the floor with the arms to lift the hips up and still find the honest, true relationship at the shoulder. So we're not pushing so far that we're out of the shoulder and we're not retracted and landing into the shoulder girdle. And once you've had enough of that, just gently take a few baby steps and walk the feet forward into a forward fold. And if you're in puppy dog pose or any of those other shapes, take a moment to make your way to the top of the mat in this forward fold shape. Inhaling, coming to your half lift, feeling the strength of the core, maybe reaching through the tailbone, and then folding perhaps a little deeper. Inhale to rise up, feeling that expansion, and exhale once again, coming to our mountain pose, allowing for this mountain pose to be new and unique, perhaps meeting our mountain as if it was the first time once again. Inhale, and invite you to rise back up, inhaling, and exhale, hinging and folding forward again. Perhaps coming into an inhale for that half lift as you step one leg back. So notice I'm not cueing which leg, just allowing you to kind of guide yourself with your own wisdom on how you'll proceed with this experience. So you can choose which leg you'll use in this sun salutation that we're going to explore. So we're here in this lunge shape, taking a moment to ground down and just feel the shape of the lunge in the legs. Maybe there's a little bit of that scissoring, grounding down through the front leg, still grounding through the back leg, and letting the femurs feel like they can come toward each other at the center. And when you're ready, stepping the front leg back into our down dog shape. It could always be a puppy dog or tabletop shape. And then stepping forward with the other leg, coming back to that lunge. You can keep the knee down. You could keep the leg up. Notice what you do out of habit. Notice if there's something that is projected or ideal there. Once again, just check in with the lunge so that you can embrace the idea of all the grounding forces, all the directional forces that allow for a lunge to feel stable. Perhaps coming back to the 4-part breath even. And then when you're ready, stepping the back leg forward, finding that forward fold or half lift. Ground through the feet. Inhale and rise back up. Exhale and return to Tadasana, mountain pose. We'll continue with a few of these sun salutations, which we've explored in a couple other sessions, and allow that to be a practice that is uniquely your own. So it could be the knee, it could be tabletop, it could be a slight variation. Notice what happens out of habit. Notice what happens out of expectation. And notice if you can perhaps invite this 4-part breath into the practice. You'll choose which leg you step forward, so perhaps you'll come back into the exact same sequence that we just went through. Maybe it's this other leg that's stepping back this time. Can you invite a new, novel experience in this very familiar sun salutation that we've practiced in previous sessions? Maybe. I'm just going to allow a little bit of silence and an opportunity for you to be guided by your own wisdom. And just notice if the stories start to take over from that silence. Allowing yourself to embrace the idea that one side may have a different story than the other side. And if you've already balanced out your sequence, you can stay in a Tadasana or a shape that is, again, your choosing, as we invite the rest of our community to finish their sequence. And we'll all meet at the top of the mat in that mountain pose once you feel like you've had a chance to balance out that cycle. Maybe inviting that inhale, pause, exhale, pause. Noticing the shift of how that experience unfolds in a different context. Beautiful. Looks like we've all reached a space of Tadasana. Now that I can see. All right. So from our Tadasana shape, we'll take a moment to check in with the footprint once again. And from this Tadasana shape, or maybe our footprint feels like it's hips distance apart or shoulders distance apart, so that Tadasana feels really strong, I'll just invite you to come a little bit tighter together with the footprint for the purposes of this little playful exploration, and invite a little bit tighter footprint and sinking into a chair shape from that slightly tighter footprint. It's a little method to that madness. So it doesn't have to be that they're totally touching. Maybe there's a little bit of space between there, but just a little bit closer together may serve you moving forward. Still yogi's choice. So be guided by your own experience. Now from the shape, I'll invite you to notice the standing, the lower appendicular, maybe noticing this slight hinge in the hip, but the hinge in the knee and the hinge in the ankle, and all of the perception of the footprint as well. Notice if your toes come off the floor, if your arches pop up to provide sensation and support. Check in with all those stories of how to provide support in a slightly different base while we're building a little bit of fire in the legs, while we're building a little bit of fire in the whole body and all of our layers, maybe even checking in with the breath as we hold this chair for a little bit longer. And then maybe when you're ready, slowly just coming back to the Tadasana shape. And just notice that the respiratory rate, the texture, the temperature of your breath, the temperature of the tissues may have shifted here. Just being really curious about the experience through all the layers. All right, so we'll play with this a couple more times. Coming into this chair shape, I'll invite you, and I'm going to start with the left leg. You can start with whatever leg serves you well in this moment. I'll pour the weight of the body into the left leg and invite that right leg to start to become lighter and lighter and maybe float up. This could be enough for you in today's practice, or if you'd like to perhaps lift the leg off the ground, I'll invite you to perhaps let the knee float and see if it feels okay to cross that right leg over the left. I'm sorry, I could have told you that we could be served by being closer to a wall at this point. So if you need to make your way to a wall right now, please do so. Apologies for that. But take a moment to, if you're still in this balanced shape, perhaps find a drishti. So looking for a visual anchor and setting the hips and setting the legs up for success. And if you've crossed the right leg over the left, then maybe invite that right arm underneath the left and come back to our exploration of this arm position, this eagle shape. Maybe there's an opportunity to play with the external rotation there as well. And just taking a moment to sit in the challenge of the complexity and nuance of all of these experiences of balancing. And we're looking for stillness, and it might be very elusive in this shape. You play with your breath pattern and just kind of notice if there's something that is supportive in noticing your inhale, pause, and exhale, pause. Notice how the challenge of balance often brings us into that present moment. And when you're ready, perhaps just gently making your way back to a standing shape. And as you notice that standing shape, if it feels auspicious to do so, you may take a little bit of a shake with the leg that was working so hard there. And if you didn't make your way to a wall before and you'd like to on this one, you definitely can. Apologies for that. But having a little bit of balance can be helpful here. Having a wall to help provide stability. Come back to the footprint. Once again, a tighter footprint helps the shift from 2 feet to 1 foot. So consider that. Doesn't have to be touching, but maybe close can be helpful. And then begin to sit down. Once you come into that stance, just begin to bring your weight into the other leg, whatever leg you started with. So I'm going to the right now and beginning to get light with the left and inviting that cross. So one of the things that could end up happening is that the left hip can go really far forward. So you're not going to overcorrect back, but allow for that turn to take place just where it makes sense for you. So maybe the leg comes around, it's a different side, it has a different story. So maybe the leg doesn't come around, maybe the leg stays right here, touching the floor in front. Allow for the femur to feel like it can come back into the pelvis, right? And even when you play with the arm position and you play with that protraction, there's a little retraction that helps with the external rotation so that we're not overreaching and we're coming back into the center of gravity. And that's the equilibrium is our center of gravity over our base. We have a really small base here and we have a little bit of a complicated center. So can we cultivate some clear perception and invite a sense of focus And you may be coming out of your balance and touching down to ground and then returning back into your balance. Perhaps inviting the awareness back to that 4-part breath. Now, after playing with that shape, when you're ready, gently coming back to your standing pose. And if it feels nice to do so, maybe shaking out the leg that was just providing the stability. If it got a little bit of heat, maybe you can feel the resonance of the work that that tissue is doing, the energy there. I invite you to perhaps come back to this standing shape, and if it feels inviting to you, think about closing the eyes. Maybe it's just a matter of lowering your gaze and lowering the eyelids to halfway. I invite you to turn your senses inward. Notice any of the shift that's occurred and any of the layers that are revealing themselves to you. If you're new to this series, perhaps considering how the physical body is showing up in this moment, maybe how any shift that's occurred from the beginning of the practice reveals perhaps some clear perception. The breath, the mind stories, maybe the effect of balance and drishti, a visual anchor, an opportunity, and an invitation for focus. Noticing how that's affected your wise and intuitive layer. Maybe just for a moment, noticing that you're in a community that was willing to play with that together in a space that we've all created to support one another. And with that, when you're ready, you can flutter your eyes open if they were closed. And grounding through your feet, I invite you to reach the arms back up one more time and exhale and find your hinge, making sure that if you've come to the wall, then let's come back to the top of the mat. Make sure you have some blocks that are close by for our next playful shape. So from the half lift, I invite you to, once again, choose the leg that you're going to step back. Notice what comes out of habit, notice what comes out of novelty or prediction. There's no right or wrong there. And as you come back to this lunge shape, consider where the blocks may best support you. And from that lunge shape, as you ground down and feel some of the energy that we talked about in that playful sun salutation, so my right leg is forward, so the right femur is coming in, the left femur is coming in, both meeting in this kind of scissoring effort at the center. See if you can keep that, and perhaps invite a little bit of extension in the front leg. Notice if you'd like to shift the position of your blocks for this. So once again, there's a little bit of balance that's going on here. If you move your feet a little wider apart, they could be a little bit more balanced. If you move your feet a little tighter together, there's more of a lateral challenge for your balance. Having your blocks at each side can be really helpful. So here we are in a fold once again. So imagine how that my right leg's forward. So the femur is reaching back and the pelvis is coming over the head of the femur. Maybe inviting both directional reaches. So the tailbone going back and the crown of the head reaching forward. And perhaps this feels like enough of a forward fold for you. And if you'd like to continue this fold forward, you could always change the shape of your blocks, or you can perhaps move the hands into the shape that works best for you. When you're ready, Beginning to slowly make your way out of that pose by softly bending the front leg. And then stepping forward with stepping the back leg forward and coming back into that half lift. And then taking a moment to switch sides, whichever leg you had forward now goes back. And knowing that one side has a different story than the other side. So consider the footprint width and how it provides stability or does not. And just notice how the other leg provides, the other femur has a different relationship with the pelvis and ends up manifesting and unfolding in a different way. So maybe there's a really different hand position here. Notice if you're projecting an ideal of how this shape should go. And as you allow for this experience to unfold, just notice if there's any stories that are pulling you out of the opportunity to engage in the present moment and invite some clear perception. So allowing for any little bends that help support this shape. When you feel like you've experienced this shape on the other side in an equal way, satisfying to you, go ahead and bring a little bit more of that bend into both legs, or maybe just the front leg, and invite the back leg forward. And from that folded shape, we're going to make our way down. So if you'd like to come into this kind of wider footprint and squat your way down, you can slowly come into this Malasana shape that we've played with a few times. Maybe slowly allowing for the hips to lower down, and maybe allowing the hips to find the floor behind you, and coming into a seat. And from the seated position, we're actually going to set up actually we'll come down into a supine position, and we'll just take a gentle little twist. So take a moment to draw the belly in, maybe reaching your hands forward, or if you'd like to just really support yourself with the arms coming back, you can slowly begin to come back with the arms. And find your way into a supine shape. And from that supine shape, take a moment to consider your footprint, maybe allowing for the footprint to be slightly wider than hips distance apart, and then allowing for the knees to fall to one side. So that allows for like a gentle rotation without having to turn the hips very much. And if you'd like to have a deeper twist, you could decide to reshape that rotation by bringing your feet closer together and allowing the knees to fall to one side. That involves more of a rotation in the pelvis, perhaps even providing a little bit of a prop like the knees, like a blanket underneath the knees. Once you make your way into the rotation on one side, take a moment to once again intentionally turn inward and invite awareness of the 4-part breath without as much of the effort that could have been there in some of the previous poses. And beginning to invite a sense of cooling, a sense of surrender, a sense of release. Still inviting a curiosity about the experience that's unfolding, perhaps being curious about textures of the breath, maybe inviting a sense of smoothness, sweetness, peacefulness, maybe even silence. When you're ready to switch to the other side, whatever shape you took, consider setting that up on the other side. If it's the knees together, maybe moving your prop to support the twist. Knowing that one side has a different story than the other side. Inviting that awareness through all the layers, noticing if there's an opportunity to invite a little bit of release, a little bit of letting go. It's a softer awareness, but still an awareness that perceives the breath and the body, and inviting that clear perception. And just as we have with some of the other experiences today, I invite you to perhaps take any last shape that would serve you well. Maybe it's just a long stretch out. Maybe it's a happy baby pose. Maybe there's a bridge. And just take an opportunity to cultivate a clear perception from the wise self that would guide a final experience that leads you into transition to your final resting place. If you're ready to go to that final resting place, beginning to set that up. Maybe that means setting up a bolster, or perhaps your reclined bolster with the blocks supporting. If it's cold where you are, maybe grabbing a blanket. If you're laying down on the back, maybe that means providing a blanket underneath the knees so that the knees have a slight hinge. Whatever shape you have decided on, begin to invite once again a sense of release, a sense of letting go, checking in with all of the layers. Maybe inviting a sense of surrender. Noticing the weight of the body. Inviting a lightness. And inviting a very gentle presence. And from this place of surrender and release and stillness, I invite you to invite a representation to emerge of a place that uniquely represents stillness to you. And this could be an image but it could also be something that's not an image. It could be a sound. It could be just a feeling, a felt sense. Welcome whatever representation that arises without needing to judge it, without any censorship. And as you welcome this place, begin to explore it with your senses. Perhaps taking it in with your eyes. Maybe just noticing the features. Maybe taking it in with your sense of touch. Maybe noticing textures, temperatures. Maybe noticing with the ears, taking in perhaps a peaceful quietude, a silence. Notice if there is any fragrance or taste, an aroma or a flavor. Whatever these qualities are to you, just take a moment to fully appreciate these aspects in this context of stillness, peace, stability, serenity, and stillness. And from this serene and safe, settled space, invite a sense of comfort in the body. Invite a gentleness in the breath. And invite a sense of spaciousness in the mind. And as you settle into this serene sanctuary, invite a sense of peacefulness. Invite this stillness to be absorbed with every fiber of your being, through the skin, through the breath, through your energetic being, through your emotional self, through your thoughts. And just feel this peace and stillness penetrate all of your layers. As you allow this image to slowly begin to fade, leaving only the felt sense of peace, the reverberations of the serenity and safety as a footprint in your awareness. And just savoring those last reverberations, those echoes. and invite a sense of peace and stillness as you move into a few final moments of silence. Beginning to come aware of the outer senses, the air on your skin, the sound of my voice, maybe some textures of feeling the clothing on your skin or the mat beneath you. Invite the body to engage in any little movement that feels auspicious. Invite any little wiggles or stretches that engage a little sense of vitality. And in your mind, begin to track a very intentional path to a seat, taking very good care from whatever posture you're in, allowing yourself to perhaps turn to a side if that feels auspicious, and taking as much time as you need to in the next 20 seconds or so to make your way to a seated position. And as you settle into your seat, once again, just inviting a sense of grounding, sense of expansion, a sense of stability. I invite you to bring your hands to heart center if that sounds inviting to you, maybe closing your eyes or lowering your gaze. And bring your awareness back to the intention you set at the beginning of class. Or take a moment to notice if there is anything in this class that you would like to take with you into the rest of your day, into the rest of your week. And whatever that thing is, with your next inhale, breathe it into your heart. And with your exhale, send it out. I invite you to lower your hands and lift your gaze. And thank you all for sharing your practice today. It is my pleasure and honor to share this time with you.